Hello everyone, Hunter here with another video for the Term 3 Drug Mnemonics series. This time we're doing antivirals. So here's the overview map of all the drugs we'll be talking about, and here's the roadmap of the drugs we'll be covering today. Firstly, we're going to be talking about some mnemonics that are for individual drugs, while also other mnemonics will be for groupings of drugs, such as the mechanism or by what they treat. I think this is a good way to memorize it because it should help with saving brain space, with being generally high yield. Also, the order of the mnemonics listed will be from easiest to hardest to remember, but there's going to be some good overlap between the mnemonics so that there's a bit of a fail-safe in case not all of them stick. Lastly, the mnemonics use accumulation of both info from our lectures and also from our drug list Excel sheet from Blackboard. It might be that I bring up information that is slightly extra to stuff we may need to know, and really this just means that I'm going to be talking about the drug didanosine or DDL and the fact that ganacyclovir treats CMV. Worst case, this is just extra information that we should know for next term or something. Once more, check the description for timestamps, and let's get started. Alright, so first off on the drug-specific mnemonics. First, we're going to be talking about these HIV-specific drugs, which are going to happen during the first, essentially 3 major steps of HIV integration into the host genome that we're going to have to know with regards to pharma. So the first of these 3 steps is the actual penetration and fusion of the HIV virus particle into the host cell membrane so it can spill its contents into the actual cytoplasm. And so the drug that's going to inhibit this is Enfuvirtide, and we can remember this with the mnemonic Enfuvirtide or Enfuvirtide. And so the N in Enfuvirtide is for entering the cell, and the Enfuvirtide is for the actual fusion of the viral particle with the host cell membrane. Enfuvirtide is going to inhibit the general entry of the virus in addition to it through harming its fusion with the host cell membrane. Next is Efavirenz, which I like to think about it as the F's up virus in terms of its effing up the whole shtick of HIV. Part of the big reason of why HIV is such an important virus, why we make this whole class of antiretrovirals like really only to combat HIV, is the fact that once it enters into the host, it is able to do reverse transcription and bring its contents into the host genome, and then it is able to actually integrate its DNA with the host DNA. And so if we are able to use Efavirenz, we are going to be inhibiting the actual ability for the DNA to be created, and so there is no way for the HIV DNA to be integrated into the host genome, so we have really effed up the whole shtick of what HIV is trying to do. So Efavirenz F's up the virus. Lastly here is Raltegravir, and we're just going to be using the mnemonic that was brought up in lecture, which is the tegra, meaning that it's going to inhibit the integrase that is used by the virus in order to actually integrate its newly formed DNA into the host genome. So those 3 drugs were all for HIV. Now we're going to be talking about Molnupiravir, which is specifically going to be treating COVID-19. So the way I like to remember Molnupiravir is the idea that Molnupiravir manipulates the virus. So it is manipulating the RNA that is created, as in increasing the error rate of the mRNA replication of the virus, which is going to decrease its ability to go on to infect new cells. Lastly here for drug-specific mnemonics is Amantadine, which is going to be used to treat flu. And the way I recommend to remember this is with the sentence, a man taking off his coat, Amanta for Amantadine, of course, and coat because Amantadine inhibits the ability for the endocytosed virus to be able to remove its coat within the host, meaning that it is having a much more difficult time spilling the viral contents out into the cytoplasm of the cell, inhibiting the ability of flu to infect the host and replicate within the host. So a man taking off his coat for Amantadine, and the coat is that it messes with viral uncoating. Okay, now let's go back to HIV-specific drugs for now. In particular, we're going to be talking about the drugs that inhibit the reverse transcriptase that is used by the virus to convert its RNA into DNA that can be integrated into the host. So with regards to inhibiting the reverse transcription, there is 2 main pathways of drugs that are used. One is NTRIs, which are nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. These are going to be nucleoside analogs that are taken up by the reverse transcriptase enzyme. And if these nucleoside analogs are used by the reverse transcription enzyme, then it's going to result in a less stable strand that is going to be less effective for the virus to use. The other way the reverse transcription process is inhibited is with NNTRIs, which are non-nucleoside reverse transcription inhibitors, which in this case with Efavirenz, it is going to just be covalently bonding to the actual reverse transcriptase enzymes the virus use, such that it's not able to properly make strands of cDNA. Now, how do you remember the pairing of which ones are the nucleosides versus which ones are the non-nucleosides? Well, I like to think of the length of the word. So in general, the NTRIs are going to be composed of drugs that are shortened into these 3-letter abbreviations. DDL, AZT, ZDV, these are commonly given as 3-letter abbreviations, and honestly, probably what we're going to have on the exam, it'll probably say didanosine in parentheses DDL cell, or zidovudine in parentheses AZT when they're talking about the drug anyway. So if you want to know what the actual drug you're looking at, whether it is an NTRI or an NNTRI, the shorter words here are going to be paired with the shorter word here. So this longer 5-letter NNTRI is paired with the longer Efavirenz, which doesn't have a 3-letter abbreviation. The drug you're looking at is messing with reverse transcription with regards to HIV-specific drugs. This is what I recommend to figure out whether it is likely to be an NTRI or an NNTRI. So first off, with the protease inhibitors, I want to talk a bit about ritonavir. Now, in Dr. Reddy's lecture on HIV, he talked about ritonavir and indinavir being used as antivirals for HIV specifically. But in our drug metabolism lecture, we actually talked about how ritonavir can also be used with nirmatrelvir, and it can be used in a cocktail where instead of ritonavir being a direct antiviral protease inhibitor, in the case of being used for COVID medication, it can actually be used to competitively inhibit the CYP450 enzyme as to increase the bioavailability of nirmatrelvir in the Paxlovid drug concoction. So ritonavir has that use, which hypothetically could be brought up, but with regards to the actual protease inhibitors that Dr. Reddy gave his lectures on, we're going to be talking about indinavir and ritonavir being HIV drugs, whereas nirmatrelvir is the COVID drug, and we're going to assume that ritonavir is HIV specific. Now that that's out of the way, let's get on to the actual mnemonic sentence, which is India's right on track to cure HIV, but COVID is just a part of normal life. So indinavir here is with India, right on is for ritonavir. HIV, of course, means that these two drugs treat HIV as protease inhibitors, and then for normal life, nirmatrelvir is being used to treat COVID. So those are all of the protease inhibitors with what they treat. Now, the last mnemonic for this page involves the chain terminators, which are listed here on the left. And what I realized is that you can actually arrange these 5 chain terminator drugs into the mnemonic for drags. So drags, as in dragging the chains, as in a slang for being really slow at something. So I'm currently dragging the chains and studying for head and neck anatomy. But drags here is for DDL, remdesivir, acyclovir, ganicyclovir, AZT, for the shorthand of zidovudine. Anyway, so after I made this mnemonic, I actually realized that you can actually write out what all these drugs treat in another column, and you actually get a second mnemonic. So DDL and AZT from last semester, these are both used to treat HIV. Remdesivir is, of course, COVID. Encyclovir is used to treat herpes simplex virus, and ganicyclovir is used to treat CMV, which is cryomegalovirus. And what I realized is that if you actually look at the first letters of each of these, you get this HCHCH pattern, which, if you kind of sound it out, sounds a lot like ch, ch, as in like you're dragging the chains behind you, and that is the sound the chains make as they're being dragged. So the chain terminators spell out drags, the 5 of them we have to know for this term, and additionally, they make the ch, ch sound when you're actually looking at what they treat. Now let's get on to another HIV-specific mnemonic, which is a mnemonic for the actual HIV antivirals. And we're going to combine all of the drugs that you see on the left side of the screen here into one solid mnemonic. And the steps in which they're listed is going to follow the steps at which the HIV entry in and then replication within the cell and then exiting the cell would occur in real life. And so the order of the sentence is going to follow the order that HIV would take. So the sentence for this is entry into the nucleus, in and right out to the next cell. So N is, of course, for Enfuvirtide, our drug from earlier, which we know is involved with preventing the entry and fusion of the virus into the cell. The N/NNTRI is trying to shorten the NTRI or the NNTRI, which are going to inhibit the reverse transcriptase. Into means integrase, which from our mnemonic from earlier we know is Raltegravir. And nucleus here is a keyword, meaning that all of the drugs listed going up to the nucleus involve the path of the virus into the cell, and all of the mnemonics going after nucleus involve it leaving the nucleus and leaving the cell. Okay, so we've gone to the nucleus, which is the high point, which would be around here. So next, for in is going to be indinavir, and right out is once more ritonavir. And to the next cell, as in the HIV virus would then leave after proteolytic processing to then infect a new cell. So entry into the nucleus, in and right out to the next cell, incorporates the logical flow and the logical chunking of the various drugs and drug types we would need to know for HIV antivirals. So the last mnemonic for this video, which is the longest mnemonic but has the most compressed amount of information in here, is going to be for non-HIV and non-COVID antivirals, which you need to know. As a heads up, I know this is a slightly grammatically incorrect sentence, but it will be useful for the mnemonic. A man sailed his plane, then he and his crypto gang cycled to see Hurricane Harvey. Okay, so a man, of course, is for Amantadine. Celled is for Oseltamivir. Plane makes me think of flying, as in the flu, so it treats flu. He here stands for herpes simplex virus. The and is for anciclovir. Crypto stands for CMV, which is cytomegalovirus. And gang cycled is for ganciclovir. C here is for hep C. And lastly, Harvey here is for Harvoni. So now we can actually logically chunk all of this information together. So amantadine and oseltamivir are to treat the flu. Herpes simplex virus is treated by anciclovir. CMV is treated by ganciclovir, and hep C is treated by Harvoni. And so that's a lot of information right there. But additionally, something to note is that between the two flu drugs, amantadine and oseltamivir, the order in which they're presented in the mnemonic is the same as the order in which they would be interfering with the flu virus within the cell. So amantadine is going to be inhibiting the ability of the virus to enter, and oseltamivir is going to inhibit the ability of the virus to leave. And so even if you just know the phrase a man celled his plane and you don't know the rest of the mnemonic, you still know these two flu drugs in addition to the relative order in which they would be applied to prevent the spread of flu in the host cell.